Yeah.
All right, so it is started. We'll wait for a second here and give people a chance. Who's gonna do the?
I'll do it.
You want it? Yeah, okay. Well, now here's the thing, Jos. If you're gonna do the open, you got to do my patented.
I think you got to flip the camera around for that. That's got to be done by you.
Yeah.
We've set a precedent. You don't want to do his opening song.
My opening song. Okay, so I'll do it here. I don't know if I'm on, but we'll go.
You're on.
Chickens live.
Be sure you don't.
All right, we got 10 people. Let's get going.
All
All
right.
right.
So
All right.
I think
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. We're here to do a quick kind of a feed class, chicken class tour of our family feed mill. This is one of our favorite things to bring people through. Obviously, this year we've been limited with social distancing, so we figured we would do it virtual. But we want to remind everyone that you can always do this tour with groups or other things later. We'll talk about that. But we wanted
one real quick. Who are you?
My name is Jos Zamzow, and I'm here with Chris Owings. And Cory, do you want to open up with, or are we going to start talking about the baby chick stuff, or are we going to start talking about tour?
You know, I think we do the tour first.
Yeah.
And then
All
we'll
right,
come out
do the
here
tour.
and talk about chickens.
Yeah.
The tour's the exciting part. I say we do that first.
Okay,
The
all
tour
right.
is pretty cool.
Fair enough. But before we start the tour, right behind us, this is the original Zamzow store on Fairview Avenue at the corner of Liberty and Fairview. And it wasn't Fairview at that time. That was Highway 30. It was a dirt road that went between Boise and Nampa. And this original Snodgrass feed mill was the spot. And this is well into it. I think this is a picture taken in the 40s. But my grandfather's house was behind there and still
is, huh?
It still is.
Yeah.
And of course, this store has been remodeled a few times since that point. But
that original structure is still there, right?
yeah, parts of it,
yeah.
Really?
Parts of it are some of the foundation pieces for sure.
I was trying to remember too. Do we still have this sign?
I don't believe we do.
No?
I wished we
Okay.
did. I wished we did. But I think the big takeaway from this is we've been making animal feeds in this area for the animals in this area for an awful long time. And our feeds, if you took them to Atlanta, Georgia, I guess you could debate whether they were the perfect ones for those animals. But in this valley, we figured out how to feed the animals here, and so you get that with every one of our feeds.
Yeah. Very cool. And then the other thing that was neat here, this is the original cash register.
Yeah,
Right?
That was the register that my grandfather used here for all the years. The
there any
button's
money in it?
worn off. Yeah,
There's no money.
some silver nickels in there.
Very cool. All right. So if you guys anybody has questions while we're going through this, please feel free to ask. We will answer any of those questions as we go through the tour here, and then we'll get into some chicken stuff. So let's, Jos, you're the guy who does these tours for the public, so why don't we follow you?
All right. Well, so as we make our way through this was the second retail location, and this building originally on the north side of the building was built in 1911 and was a flour mill originally. And my great grandfather August and his brother Carl were on their way to California on what in the immigrant cars, what they called it, which basically meant they were just in a train car rolling along on bales of hay, and they veered off of the path and decided to stop in Meridian. And August ran into downtown Meridian to get a sandwich, and the original story was that he missed the train. What we learned afterwards was that my great-grandmother, Carmelita, the one that we call Grandma Z, worked at that bakery. And so now what we believe may happen, and since they're both passed away, they can't deny, is that August got to flirting with the girl at the bakery and missed the train. And so his brother, Carl, went on to California, and August stayed here in Meridian, worked for a family, and then the two of them did get married, and they had a farm in Boise, not far from Boise Town Square Mall, where they had a dairy. And in the worst year of the Depression in 1933, they sold that dairy and they bought that little building on Fairview that we mentioned. It was the old Snodgrass Feed Mill on Highway 30 and started in the feed business at that point.
Yeah, it's wild, man.
Yep.
Just
And here we are almost 90 years later.
right, yeah. It's pretty in the same place.
Same place.
So this side of the mill we call the new side because it was remodeled in the mid-50s.
The new side.
Yep. And as we come out here, you get the feel for a really old style of construction. Tons of wood, obviously, and square nuts and bolts, which were the standard of that particular time. And just a really, if you're into buildings, into history, just to see the way these things were put together is really fun, and even more unique as we move that direction. But all of the stuff that we have out here is relatively intact, except for, if you notice at the floor, we have some diamond plate. These floors are original. And the feed carts that are behind you, Nolan, the hand trucks that we move feed around with the rubber tires, they didn't chew up the floor. But when we started palletizing feed, really in the 1990s, when we started doing a lot of that, the pallet jacks tore up the floor, and so we had to have diamond plate on this side. But a lot of this
Yeah,
stuff
I mean,
is just as
you're just looking down the hallway, you can see
Awesome.
how it's all original past this point.
right.
And it's just kind of you think of what somebody would pay
Yeah.
to have a floor like that. It's pretty wild.
So then up on the wall, you see the original, this is one of the original Zamzow's feed bags. We used to put feed in 100-pound bags. And one of my favorite stories was that Grandpa loaded 10 100-pound bags onto a cart, wheeled them out, and was loading them into the back of this guy's truck. And Grandpa did them all up to the 9th bag, and then he got to the 10th bag. The guy reached down to help him with one bag, grabbed the other side of it, and as they lifted, he said, "Wait a minute, Bernie, that's not 100 pounds. I want you to take all those bags in. We're going to go in, we're going to weigh every single one of them, and you're going to give me my money back on what you shorted me." So he took the 100-pound bags back onto the cart, wheeled it back in, put them on the scale. 101, 100 and a half, 100 3/4. Every single one of them was over at least like a half a pound. And then he told the guy, "You owe me 2 bits."
Because that was the deal.
Right.
That was the deal.
So one of the things that is unique about this feed mill is we still hand bag all of our feed. We hand bag and hand sew all of our own feed, and this isn't the most efficient way to do this, but it lends us a couple of things. We get a final check on quality, so you actually have somebody's eyes looking in the bag. If something doesn't look right, or the color or the smell or something, we get a chance to see it. And also when we hand sew these bags, this is a unique touch. So this is that sewing machine that we use, and the sewing machine gets heavy, even for these guys that do this all the time that are super strong. So we've done a lot of innovation over the years. And this one we call Bucket Full of Dirt. It really does take the weight off of your arm when you're sewing, but it's amazing how well that works.
Yeah,
and we have images inside our store up here of some of these old pieces of equipment, but there's a picture of a man in the 50s standing right here sacking feed exactly. The things are the same. They just hadn't developed a bucket of
They hadn't
dirt
got so
technology.
advanced yet.
They didn't have bucket of dirt technology just yet.
What if we need to bring those in the stores?
Right, exactly. Exactly. So we can make our way this way. And I always like to point out on this wall, the entire inside of the office in there, and there's some up in the store. These are all the kids whose animals that we've bought over the years. At the Canyon County Fair or the Ada County Fair or Waihee County, we've had many kids that have won grand champion about every category that you can think of, and reserves. But not all these kids won championships, but all these kids were our customers. And we've spent a lot of time keeping track of the families that do business with us here, and And when we go to the fair to buy animals, we buy animals from the kids that fed our feed.
Nice.
Number one, because we know the meat will be better.
Yeah.
But also because we believe in that. You know, it's the ultimate keep it local. We bought local grains from local farmers. We made local feed. These local kids used our feed to make their animals, and if we buy those, the money all stays local, which is the whole concept.
That's
Yes.
great.
So as soon as we pass here, we're moving into the old side, the original piece, the original Snodgrass feed, or not Snodgrass, but the original flour mill that was here in 1911. And one of the things that's unique about the flour mill is that we had a cleaner. A cleaner is something that you would find in a human flour facility,
Yeah.
not in a feed mill ever, because they needed to make sure they got all the junk
Right.
out when they were making human flour. So when Grandpa bought this and kind of remodeled it, because he was a child of the Depression, well, we weren't going to throw away the cleaner. We might as well use the cleaner. And what it allowed us to do was make some of the cleanest feed that any of the farmers around here had ever seen before, because people weren't cleaning animal feed at that point. It was just like, it's just an old cow. Who cares if there's a rock or a stick or something in it? And when they got our feed that had gone through this human flour cleaner, people started saying the Zamzow product is really quality. And I know there's a lot of companies that they're brand new and they don't even have any track record, and they say we make quality products. But when we started, we just were doing the best we could with what we had, and the customers said Zamzow's they make quality products. And I think it may be that cleaner was the thing that started that whole process. And then we felt like we kind of owed it to our customers to follow suit with everything else that we've made. But that silly little cleaner maybe was the start of all of it.
Was that one of those gravity shake cleaners?
Yes, it has a vacuum.
Oh, okay.
Literally on the top, and it shakes it. So as it goes through, it sucks off the stuff that is too light.
Right.
And you get the suction set just right so that it only sucks off the stuff you don't want, and then the dirt and other stuff sift through.
Yeah.
So the other thing I like to show people right here that's very, very unique. So this is rolled corn. And not a big deal. Everyone has rolled corn. But corn has a lot of sugar in it, as everybody knows. And when you roll it, you're literally crushing it flat. You're using steam. So you have moisture and you have sugar, which makes rolled corn mold really easily. And so the way that big feed mills combat that is as it rolls through the roller and it gets treated with the steam and crushed flat, they spray it with a mold inhibitor, which is basically a fungicide.
Yeah.
And those fungicide barrels, if you ever saw one, they've got hazmat all over them, danger, all that stuff. It's just not dangerous if the horses or your cows just eat a little bit every day. It's not dangerous, but cumulatively could be a problem. So what we have as an advantage here is because we don't make any feed for giant stockyards. I don't have to roll that much corn at any one time. And in Southwest Idaho, it's dry here. The air is dry. So we can roll corn, and I can put it in these bags and let it dry naturally. No mold inhibitor ever in this feed mill. So that's a very, very unique thing, because even in natural feed mills, they're still using mold inhibitors because it's one of those huge issues.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we have never had a chemical in this building ever.
Right.
Yeah, not once.
So, standing right over here, if you look down inside, you've got the flashlight. You're looking down into a giant mixer, similar to the one you'd have in your kitchen, but it runs the full length of this floor.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see through the
Right, you
in
can't
the
see.
thing.
This
I've
is
seen this thing moving.
It's
though.
got giant
It is,
ribbons in there.
Yeah, it's pretty cool when it's moving.
And we have our formulations lined up. You'll have an operator here, and these handles and switches, really high technology,
Yeah.
that are attached, and this giant mixer is sitting on top of a scale. So as you're building a formula, you might use, this one says ground barley, you might pull this handle, and there's ground barley up above us that feeds into the mixer that's sitting on the scale that tells us where we are in the formulation.
Oh, this is the scale.
Right.
It's not even an electrical readout.
Oh, no. And what's amazing is these guys that run this, they are, they remind me of the inner, like, downtown New York chocolatiers that have been making chocolate for 150 years in their family. These guys, they pull the barley, and they know as it approaches, just by feel, when you shut it, how to get it to lock right where it needs to be.
Yeah.
Then we hand add vitamins and minerals. This thing stirs up, and then when we get ready to move it to the next part of the mill, we have this technology, which is chain on a handle. You crank this, and it opens a door, and the feed just moves out into elevators that we can move it to different parts of the facility. So if we were going to make chicken feed, for example, we would take all of the pieces, the components together here, and then we would move it over to the pellet mill, which is where we're going to go next to actually make the pelleted feed.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Pretty fancy.
It really
I don't know
is
if it's
cool.
it's bucket o' dirt fancy, but it's pretty fancy.
And these are over here, Josh. So these are the like the vitamins and minerals that get added by hand.
These are the what we would call the shorts. These are the small ads for various things. So this building sits. We have a basement, and the concrete is ultra thick. I think it's at least 3 feet thick.
Wow.
And down in the basement, if it's 110 outside, it's still 60 down there.
Yeah.
And if it's minus 10 outside, it's still 60 down there. And so it's just this really nice. It's like a root cellar, and it allows us to keep all of our vitamins and minerals really high quality. And if we were trying to redesign it, that's what you would dream of. It
Right.
just would be too expensive to ever replicate.
Yeah.
You'd have
Yeah,
to do it
for
with a
sure.
refrigerator.
Pretty cool.
But I think it's neat to point out this is rough cut lumber on this side. So these are not. This is not the traditional dimensional lumber. They're not like a 2x12 or whatever.
Yeah.
It's closer to like 3 and change.
Yeah.
And each one of these beams that's supporting the stuff up above us, this was a tree that had a beam that big, and you just now
Right.
they would glue together.
Right.
with-
Yeah. Exactly. That's one
One
piece of
giant
wood.
piece.
Solid piece, yeah.
Can't
They're
even
huge.
imagine. It's crazy.
All right, so let's make our way this way.
So this is it's got enough light.
Well, does it?
So,
Yeah. Well, we'll probably need it when we look in the thing.
so this is what's called a pellet mill. This is how you make pelleted feed. And all feed mills have pellet mills, just not all feed mills have old, small pellet mills. And to give you an idea, this pellet mill, if we were cranking it, we could do a couple of ton in an hour. I mean, if we
nice.
were really hammering it along. And big feed mills put pellet mills in that do 100 ton an hour. And the challenge when you go faster is you create more heat and more pressure to get it to go fast. And heat and pressure destroy vitamins, and they
Right,
destroy the other
nutrients,
things.
yeah.
The same thing is if fresh broccoli has a certain value for your health, and cooked broccoli is compromised by the cooking process, the same thing happens in big pellet mill operations. And so in this little pellet mill, and we've replaced all the bearings and maintained, the outside looks rough, the inside this thing still runs like a top, but we love it because the pellets as they come out are not too hot to touch. I mean, there's not a huge heat issue. And then because we were compromised in the physical space that we had, the only way they could pull them off was to vacuum them all the way to the top. So there's a giant vacuum that pulls the pellets off the mill and sucks them all the way to the top.
Oh, is that this part here?
That's this.
Wow.
And then they go up, and so what little temperature comes off is immediately dissipated by the time, just by virtue of the fact that was what they had. So that people understand, if you've ever played with the Play-Doh barber shop, that's how pellets are made. In effect, you take the meal, the ground barley and the vitamins and the minerals,
That's
and
what this is
so
doing.
the meal feeds through here, and then as it goes through, you have this rotating that we call a die, and you can see the pellets
yeah,
sticking
yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
Just
Right.
extrudes them.
And in effect, the extruder is a little different technology, but it does press them through the die. And then we have this technology right here, which this determines how long
Right.
you
Oh,
want.
okay.
You
And
want
so
the
that's
pellet.
moving this thing here.
So you see the knife. It's this one
Yeah.
down here. So if you want a short chop,
Yeah.
you crank it down so it cuts them off just as they spin around.
Neat.
And if you want a longer pellet, you could pull it back. But we have along here, you can see the dies
Oh yeah.
of various different sizes, the big dies all the way down to the really small dies, depending on what you're trying to make, which type of feed you're trying to make.
Cool.
And those are unbelievably heavy.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
Try it, Chris. Let's see.
So, really cool. And this is one of the pieces that Grandpa put in when he remodeled. And I think sometimes when people say, if you look at the label, what's the difference between your lay pellets and somebody else's brand? If the vitamins and minerals on the label are similar, what makes your feed different? And I don't want to underestimate the value
Yeah.
of this low compression, low heat pellet mill because it just maintains the integrity. And those are the things that make that yolk darker and give the animals longer life.
Cool.
Yep. And that is noticeably different
Right.
if you've ever used our feed.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I eat our feed all the time.
Yeah.
That's why you're so tall, man.
That's why I got so tall.
I
That's why his hair's
wish-
so amazing.
I wish they could smell in here.
Oh yeah, it is.
Speaking of the feed, it is just such a sweet,
Oh yeah, it's so
refreshing smell.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I wish that was portrayed through the video, but
Coming
So-
soon.
Coming
Facebook
soon.
Live
With
smell
smell-o-vision.
Smell-o-vision.
So Cory is standing
Oh.
right here on this beam,
Oh.
and you were asking me earlier about this sign. And whenever we bring kids through the mill in a tour, we always stop here and we ask the kids, why would we have asked customers to not smoke here? Please come inside to the office to smoke. And these kids are like 9 to 13. They can't comprehend of a good reason why we would have wanted people to come in. But obviously it's because feed mills are flammable. And this is one of the last old style wooden feed mills, not because they all were obsoleted, most burnt down. And so whenever somebody comments about how clean and tidy this mill is, it's because it's the grain dust is flammable, and we have to keep it clean to keep it safe. So
yeah.
It's a subtle difference. You know, please don't smoke here. Come to our office.
Yep. Yes.
All right. So is this?
So this is a fun thing here. This particular deal we call the man lift, and this is one of those pieces of equipment that you'll never get a chance to see because you would never get to build another one of these in a commercial facility. But because the way this building is set up and the fact that this was here, and it has been retrofit to a certain degree for OSHA safety, which they've reviewed many times, but this is designed to allow our mill operators to get to the top of this building for when they're mechanically moving a valve or something. So you're trying to move something over. If it got jammed up or something, you would need to get up there in a hurry, or you could have a big problem, and it would take you forever to run up a spiral staircase. So this is a counterweighted elevator system that has a foot brake and a rope. And so you stand on this thing and push the foot brake, pull the rope, and it's counterweighted, so it's designed for somebody about 160 pounds. And if you are lighter than 160 pounds, you go up like a rocket ship. You just have trouble coming back down. And if you're bigger like me than 160 pounds, I have a really hard time going up, but man, I come screaming down. But all the safety is there so that if a rope broke or something like that, it would just lock in on the wood, and
Right.
you might have to sit up there for a little bit till we could get the ladder. But I wish that, no power. There's no electricity used here. It's all human power, and with the safety, old style safety mechanisms in place. And elevators use a lot of electricity, and I think in some ways this is a really cool technology. I wish there was more of, not less of, but it is the reality that we live in.
All right.
Being 160 pounds, it rules me out, but I'd love to see this thing in action.
No,
Chris,
wanna
you
give it a
up for
run,
the challenge?
Yeah,
I'll hold the flashlight.
So here's the foot brake, and then you.
Which I'm barely heavy enough to hold the foot brake.
Yeah, we get it.
All right. So then he pulls up. Was it hard to pull up?
No, super easy.
Right. Not.
But you
And,
can see my own weight.
Yeah, we get it, Chris.
I have to pull myself down.
Okay, so this beats bucket o' dirt.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super cool design. This is one of the things that when we bring historical groups through, they're always fascinated by
it's neat.
this.
I can't really get a picture of it, but I wish I could show. It tries to rotate the camera and it blocks, the sun gets too bright, but it goes way up there.
Yeah, it goes straight up.
It's
Is it
pretty
all the way to the
awesome.
top?
Yeah, it goes
3-4
clear to the
stories.
top.
That's awesome.
Yeah, pretty neat.
All right, so we can go this way now.
We're gonna get a little transition into some light here.
This area has some of my favorite stories.
So you can see a lot of different construction styles. One of the original bins, this concrete bin, you can literally see that they had fence boards tied together with wire.
Oh yeah, you can
In
see
each
that through
layer.
the concrete. It's
They-
kind of hard to see in the video.
Yeah, but that was a concrete bin, and it doesn't hold as much grain as you would think, because it has to be a lot thicker
Right.
than you would imagine. And then you have some metal bins and some other things, and then you have the corn crib, what we call the corn crib, which this is flat stacked 2x6s all the way to the top.
I know.
Yeah,
Can you imagine how
I-
many
I-
boards are
And
in
then
there?
there's boards in the middle. There's actually 4 bins in there.
I don't know if I can really get this shown very well, but I mean, you don't see anything built like this.
So,
No.
Like,
we were
there-
doing the math. We think there may be more wood in this bin than there is the rest of the buildings between here and Fairview.
Yeah,
It's
and
crazy.
and even though the outside is weathered, the inside looks like a basketball court. It's perfectly smooth. You can't even
really?
feel the seams just
Wow.
because the grain has just sanded it over years.
Yeah.
Years worth,
And when
yeah.
we replace boards, and we have, you dry rot or whatever, you pull the outside is worn, the inside is perfect. It's really interesting. But we have always bought local feed. And when Grandpa first remodeled this and really started going in the feed business, we would have local farmers here. We would unload. This is the scale house inside this building. They would be parked bumper to bumper out on Meridian Road and clear down to Cherry Lane or Fairview Avenue or Highway 30, whatever you want to call it, waiting to unload. And farmers during harvest are impatient. They got to get back to the field. And so at that point, there weren't hydraulics. And so they had a couple of different ways. They would pull in and weigh and then shovel the grain out into the pit so that it could be augered up. Or they had this piece of plywood they would tie a rope on, and the farmers' kids would get in the back and they would wrestle it down in the grain, and they would tie the rope onto this beam, and then their dad would drive west and it would push the grain out, and then they would back up, put the back in, and then they would do that over and over again, and that was relatively fast. But farmers were starting to say, Bernie, if you can't unload us faster, we're going to have to go to the big operation. And so he hired a crane company to build a crane inside, and we got a rope, and they would weigh the truck full. We would tie the rope on the front axle and lift the entire front of the truck up in the air, and all the grain would slide out of the back, and they would be on their way. And of course, everybody is saying to themselves, that's got to be incredibly dangerous. And yes, it probably was. But a farmer is just trying to get the job done, and they were thrilled, and it allowed us to really. I think it's one of those times when we were buying local, and we've always invested a lot of effort and money into trying to buy local, whatever it took, from an innovation standpoint to make that work.
Really cool. Yeah, every time I drive by this building, I'm always just kind of in awe of how, just because I know the history of it and how long it's been here. It's just amazing that it's still here.
Can they see that
Can you see the
catwalk
catwalk
up
there?
there?
Yeah.
So that used to be just like a 2x6.
Right.
That's
That
right.
ran in between, and Bernie would
Yeah.
check both the houses running on just a 2x6.
No-
It wasn't
no rail.
No hand railing. None of
Well,
that.
and
It
when
was
you
just-
get corn harvested, you have to monitor it really close because if there's too much moisture, it could literally catch on fire.
Oh, yeah.
So for a long time after harvest, you would have to go every day, even on Sunday. They would have to drive over here, and Grandpa would go up, and then he would go across to check the corn and make sure it wasn't getting hot. And his strategy was to just look straight ahead and just walk quickly across the thing. And when my dad tells it, he said that you could see the board as he walked across there. But it was just one of those things that had to be done. And even though you say it looks high from here, this is that diving board moment when you get up there and you look down. It's way higher up there than you think, and there's no comfortable place to land if that were to break. So obviously it's been retrofit now, but it still is not my favorite thing to do, to wander across that.
I don't like looking at it.
So let's make our way in, and we can talk some more about the feeds and some other things.
Yeah.
Does that work for you
Yeah,
guys?
Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, sounds
Yeah,
good.
that's perfect.
Sounds
That
great.
was a great tour.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh.
So as we kind of head in there, if anybody has any questions about this side of things, feel free to ask. It's pretty cool. We're going to get into some chicken stuff here in a second. But this is I enjoy doing this tour. I've done it. This is my second time through this, and it's still a lot of fun. Good stuff. All right. So let's see. We were going to start. Now we're getting into the chicken stuff. What was the first thing we were going to talk about
I
here?
think we're going to start with chick starter.
Chick starter. So yeah.
So basically, when you first get your baby chicks, typically they're showing up at the stores 2 to 3 days old. So teeny tiny little bird. Chick starter is what you want to start them with. It's a high protein, really designed to be kind of that chicken baby food. It's a very finely ground. I don't know if you can see it, but real small chunks.
Yeah.
So those little baby birds can eat it. And
Right. What's I just want to interrupt for a second. What's really cool is like we just saw where this stuff was made.
Yeah.
Like just a few seconds ago, we were just looking at where this stuff was made.
Well, and I
that's-
think this stuff literally gets pelletized and then crushed down to that fine
Yeah.
mash, right? So, ran through that pelletizer. Basically, this is something that those chickens are going to feed until they're about 8 weeks old, or once they have their adult feathers. So you're going to be on this for a good amount of time. And I think average, you're going to be looking at 3 chicks. This is going to last you about a month, right? So they eat a lot. So fresh food is always important. Fresh water is the next one. You're just doing something like a feed and a water for those chicks. I've heard that it's within hours of running out of water and not having anything to drink, it significantly sets back the development of the bird. I mean, forever. Speed,
Wow.
you'll just never catch up.
Wow.
So, fresh food and water. They're super dirty too, so these you want to check several times a day. They'll fill these things up with mess in a hurry. For bedding, we've always used the pine pellets here. All of our stores use this for the chick substrate. The nice part about this is it doesn't tend to get as gross as something like straw or newspaper. They can also get really, really slick. So the chickens have a hard time standing on it and they get splayed leg problems. This gives them a nice amount of traction so they can move around safely. And as it gets wet, it just bursts. So it's really easy to spot clean. You'll see little piles of sawdust. Makes it really easy to do there.
Bursts and it kind of sifts down too. So yeah, your mess is below. You're not smelling it. You're not seeing it.
Yep.
Yep.
And if you need to scoop
Really
it, it's
effective.
really fast.
Yeah.
This stuff doesn't hold any smell. I mean, we'll go through 50 birds to 100 birds in a store. You just never smell the waste, which is really nice.
Yep.
The next most important thing is those baby chicks. They're going to need a heat source for basically that whole 8-week period until they get those. First week, you're looking at 95 degrees, and then you can drop that temperature about 5 degrees a week. So you want to start them really, really warm. We like using the red bulbs. Basically, the bulbs here, it tends to wash out color a little bit. Chickens are really drawn to that red color, and if you have a chicken that gets a sore or something like that, they'll just focus in on it and peck at it. And this kind of washes some of that color away. It's also really good for not disturbing their day-night sleep cycle. So
Yeah.
they can sleep at night. It's not constantly daylight, and it just drives them crazy.
So
Yep,
Cory,
so
I want to ask the obvious question. How do I know if it's 95 degrees in the brooder? I mean, where do I buy a thermometer that I can put in there? How do I do that?
You can get little thermometers. They're really cheap, and they just lay right in the substrate. The neat part, and one of my favorite parts about chickens, is they'll self-regulate through a lot of that. So basically, your light, you want to have about 18 inches above the substrate to start, and you'll see them under there.
It's not 18 inches.
It's not 18 inches, but
Yeah.
Well, and this one has a safety guard as well. That's what
it does. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
That
So-
18 inches is a good rule of thumb. It keeps them about that temperature, and then as he was talking about cooling it, and just raise it.
Yep.
Raise it.
So,
to keep
but
it
the
a little bit
chickens,
cooler.
this is where I was coming with it, is you don't necessarily have to know 95. The chickens know 95. And if you start at 18 inches in the box
Yeah.
where they are, and you like to place it, I like to place it not in the center, but on one side.
Off in the corner, is
And,
usually-
and so
yep.
what happens is if the chickens are cold, when you come to check on them, they will all be together right underneath the light, trying to get there. And if it's too hot, they will be completely pressed against the edges of the box as far away from the light as they can be, saying, this is too hot, I got to get away.
This is why chickens always avoid me.
Right.
Too hot.
Right. So what you do then, if you start at 18 inches, and it wouldn't matter, like if people say, well, I've got ducks, and I don't know, how do I know for ducks and whatever, I say just get the light in there and then come back in about 20 minutes and see, are they huddled underneath it, in which case you lower it. If they're pushing away from it, you raise it up to give them a little bit more room.
Yeah.
And then you can just gradually watch what they do as they get older, pulling the thing up and away.
My favorite thing in the stores is you'd come in first thing in the morning. It's always really quiet, so the chicks are always asleep. And they'll literally start out day one, they're all huddled right under, kind of the center of that spot. And then the next day they're out, and the next day they're out. And they'll just be in this perfect circle right in that exact heat zone
Right in
that they
that
need
zone.
to be at. Pretty fun.
Nice.
Yeah, it is fun.
So,
Okay. Anything else we need to talk about with chicks here?
as far as setup,
Yeah, as far as the setup, I like to keep the food and water away from the light. Josh said put that in one corner. I like to do the food and the water in the other. That way they do go back and forth.
and they're not cooking every time they have to eat,
Yeah.
if it's just too warm.
Yep.
Yep.
Will they avoid the food if it's too hot? Or will they, is their urge to eat greater than their urge to stay cool?
No, if they're too cold, they will try to stay warm.
Yep.
I mean, it's got to be all right. I mean, everything has to be just right. These are babies; they're away from their mama, and so we got to get it. Especially becomes less and less critical the older they get. But at the beginning, you got to pay attention to them.
Yeah.
You got to really be there.
Especially with that heat, from what I've read, heat and stress really is what pushes that pasty butt. So if you're forcing them to go eat and drink, and they're constantly warmer than they should be, you start having those digestive issues.
Right.
Where pasty butt builds up, and
Nobody
Yeah.
wants pasty butt.
nobody wants pasty butt.
It is the worst. Yep.
Okay.
And important, if you do get the pasty butt, don't ever pull it off.
This
Yeah,
is
like I used
such
in the
exciting-
store, I
it is
used to
exciting
take
talk.
It's important though. If you have chickens, you're gonna see
Yeah, I know,
pasty butt.
right? Yeah.
You're gonna see it. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I used to use a stainless steel dog dish, fill it up with about an inch or so of water, let them run around in it, and then you just wipe it off.
Oh,
Yep.
I gotcha.
Yeah, but you don't want to pull.
Yeah.
It's attached.
All right. What was?
We want to talk about meat birds.
Do you want to cover that now, or should?
Yeah, we could talk about it really quick because
Yeah,
it's
sure.
right next to us.
Okay.
The only difference, if you plan on raising the birds, where you're actually going to harvest the birds because you want fried chicken instead of,
Scrambled
deviled eggs, right? You're using the products that we call BTG, broiler, turkey, game bird, and you use a BTG starter, a BTG grower, and a BTG finisher. And the difference is the protein level because the challenge obviously with chickens is you need to get them to size within a time window or the muscle fibers make them tough and they're not like we're traditionally used to eating, and people don't, it's rare now that you would ever get a chicken that's tough because of how they're raised commercially, but people that do them on their own and they get busy or they are not sure about the actual harvest part and they let them go too long, they end up with birds that can only be chicken soup because they can't. It's like chicken jerky.
Yeah.
And so there's a fine line. So we got to go faster, and we never feed BTG products to layer hens because it shortens their life and it's not good for them. But you have to do it on this side because if you raise them with regular feed, it takes too long and you end up with tough meat.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
Interesting.
meat bird, you're only keeping for about 12 weeks, right?
Right.
Start to finish.
Right.
So, yep, it is 4 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 weeks.
Where your layer birds will live, what, 8-10 years old?
Yeah.
Sometimes even longer.
Their production goes down over time. But so then, this is the start of both of those types, and then as you transition the layers to the next stage, we're moving over here.
So we did. What about? I know there's one other step. I'm not a chicken expert, but I know we got pullet developer.
Pullet developer.
Yeah. This is for the laying hens, right, Chris?
Right. Yep. Back to your laying birds. So the developer, you'll start transitioning to that right as they're putting on what they call the blood feather. It's that first real feather. Going through those teenage years, it's just like the acne for your teenager. They go through that kind of
They get a bunch of attitude.
Oh, man.
They think they know everything.
They do.
Just ugly.
But one thing we were talking about earlier, that normally you're gonna feed the chick starter for about 12 weeks, right, on average.
Yeah.
But eight weeks, yeah. So about 2 months. But always finish your feed. Don't get hung up like, oh, I'm right at 8 weeks. I need to get to the developer now. But just finish your bag.
Right.
If you go a week or two early or late, not a big deal.
Yeah, that same point is
With
if you're at 7 weeks, don't go buy another 50-pound bag of chick starter. Just move them to pullet developer. You'll be close enough.
Yep.
We've got
So
people
it's
with
just
adult birds that feed pullet developer.
Yeah.
Their chickens like it. It works for them.
Right.
They feed it forever.
Right.
Yeah, but that would be your mid stage there.
Okay.
Is the pullet developer after the chick starter.
So then I think then the next stage, Joss, is
The next stage is when we're talking about laying hens, assuming that these are laying hens.
Right.
So you're switching to the lay ration, the feed that you're feeding them regular when you're actually harvesting eggs.
And I'm just going to move down here and show. So we've got this apparently is new. 16% lay crumbles, 20 lay crumbles. Maybe we can get into the difference there. Pellets and 20.
Right.
So there's 16 and 20 is kind of what it comes in.
So one of the things that this is one of the most misunderstood things in chicken, and I think in raising chickens, and I think it's due to Atkins and the current obsession with human nutrition and protein. But the reality is that the ideal ration for a chicken to have a good long life and still provide the right amount of eggs is a 16%, what we call finished ration, meaning at the end of the day, that chicken is consuming, all things averaged out, 16% protein. And if you go higher with the protein, you don't end up with chickens with abs. That's not what you get. What you get is chickens.
They don't come out cut.
You get chickens that die early, right? They don't do well. And protein is dirty fuel. There's a lot of, when you're processing, it's dirty fuel. And so if you're one of those people that doesn't understand the concept and you say, well, it's really cold, I'm going to switch to 20% protein, you're actually shortening the life. And we can talk about some of the things you can do, but you want a 16% finished ration. So if we come over here, this is the common thing that people add to their ration, which this is hen scratch or scratch grains. This is a mix of grains thrown out there with the chickens, and this is like a 9%. So this one is a 9% protein. So if you're feeding 16% lay pellets and a chunk of their diet is 9%, you're down below 16% finished ration, and you will not get the optimal amount of eggs, right? And so if you're going to feed scratch grains, that's when you buy 20% lay pellets. So 20% lay together with scratch grains gets you into the 16% range, where you're optimizing the protein level for the egg production, but not compromising the life of the birds. And the reality is things have changed in the last 10 years. These are pets. We're naming them, and we want little Henny Penny to live longer, not just give us more eggs per dollar, right? And that is a different mentality. But if you go past that 16%, you aren't doing them a favor. So I wanted to bring this to attention because these are pets, there are a lot of chicken treats now that you see. High protein chicken treats, they're crickets or they're mealworms, and the chickens absolutely love these things. They do. They really do. And they don't harm the chicken at all. But if you're feeding a high protein snack, the scratch grains become even more important because this would jump your protein way up.
Yeah, the percentage on that's got to be super.
Yeah. I think you're at 42% protein right here
wow.
in these.
Yeah.
So if you're feeding 16% lay and a treat, you're way higher, and you are actually shortening the life of Henny Penny, and you want her to live longer, and you think you're doing right, but you're actually doing wrong. So it's not that you can't do this, it just means that you've got to feed scratch grains to get the overall protein down, or you're actually going the wrong direction.
Yep.
Right. Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, really, really cool. Very important stuff. I think if anybody has any questions about the feeding there, as we kind of finish up that part, go ahead and ask. I haven't seen anything come up. Hopefully, we're not having an issue like we did last time. Oh, they are
Yep,
up there.
we sure were.
See, I didn't. I'm sorry.
Dang it.
How long do you use developer? Eight weeks to.
Typically until,
Yeah.
what do they say, 30% of your flock is laying. So 8 to 20 weeks, 25 weeks, depending on the breed of bird.
Oh, I see. Jolene actually had it. So,
Oh, perfect.
what did you say, Cory?
I said anywhere from 8 to 20, 24 weeks.
Okay.
Of
And
age,
then it's you're kind of going off of when they start laying as well. So.
when most
Sorry
of your
we
flock's
missed
starting
that,
to lay, you switch
Kevin,
in.
thanks Jolene for doing that. We've got to figure out how to do that properly. For
So
next time.
you-
one of
and-
these days we'll be good at this.
Your
Yeah.
pullet developer is a crumble, and it's 17% protein.
Okay.
So it really, this is not an exact science. Make the bags fit within where you want them to be, and once they start laying, you're going to transition. But if you had a little bit of extra pullet developer that you were going to continue to feed, and they were all laying, you got a little bit of scratch grains. You're gonna, you throw some of that out there, and you can do your own ration, so to speak.
So Kevin had another question. Do the layer pellets have calcium and grit, or should those be supplemented? And I think we were just about to move into that.
Yeah.
Darcia asks if we sell regular bird food, and we do sell regular bird food for wild birds and for domestic birds.
Yeah,
or
parrots, all kinds of
pet
stuff.
birds.
Yeah.
I don't think they have it here at the feed mill. Do they have? No, not here.
No.
But at the regular Zamzow stores, they'll have that there.
Right.
So then, Joss, I think you were going to talk about calcium and grit.
Right. So I have a bin here that has two different things, and to me, these two are the biggest no-brainer of anything that you do. You've got these things are supplemented. You can they can be thrown out on the ground, or you can have a little tray or whatever. But
That's a perfect tray, actually.
yeah,
that
they
they're in.
it never goes bad. I mean, you could literally have this for 14 years sitting out there. The bugs don't eat it. Never goes bad. It's ultra cheap. I mean, a bag of grit lasts forever, and it doesn't cost anything. Has no expiration date, but it makes the feed more efficient. So the chickens have a crop, and they are actually grinding as the first stage of their digestion, grinding up everything that they eat, whether it's scratch grains or pellets or worms or whatever they eat. They're grinding them up first, and this granite, these little granite pieces, this is when you see birds out there pecking around on the ground. They're picking up these pieces of granite as a way of helping them digest, and this will save you money in feed, because if it gets a good grind, more of it gets digested and less of it passes out the bird.
So if I remember correctly, we're sitting on the pellets here that somebody needs. They need to have the grit if they're just feeding the pellets.
I would still,
Okay.
just because you're going to get a better digestion.
Okay.
That's like saying, do you really, is there any value in chewing applesauce? Well, your saliva is mixing with it a little bit, and you don't really need to chew it up, but the process of putting it in your mouth first, there is an added step, and it doesn't hurt you to do it. So I always say, even if you're feeding a lay pellet, that you get that grit, because they also are pecking other stuff. Mm-hmm. And then the other piece is oyster shell, and a lot of people say, well, I'm feeding a feed that already has calcium added.
So Kevin, the grit is not in those feeds. It does have calcium, but Joss is just about to talk about
Right,
supplementing.
and for those of you who saw the pellet mill, this is granite grit. If we put this in the pellets, it would destroy our dye.
Oh,
so
yeah,
there
right.
wouldn't be any way to do it, because this is really, really hard.
Yeah.
Plus, it would add a lot of weight.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
Buying a lot
so.
of rock in that bag of feed.
Right.
Yeah.
So oyster shell has a lot of components to it. It isn't just calcium, and there is calcium added. We do that because not everybody will feed oyster shell, but anybody that's raised their own eggs always says, you know, my shells are pretty good. They're hard enough, they don't break. But and if you're feeding a good ration, they do have the calcium where you don't see them abnormally breaking. But the thing that oyster shell does is it adds extra capacity, extra integrity to the shell, but not in the way a lot of people think. They say, well, I still need to break these things to make a cake, and I don't want to feed oyster shell because they're going to be too hard. But that isn't what happens when you're feeding, when you've got access to oyster shell. What they will notice more than any other thing is when you break the egg, you're going to have a clean break without those little jibs getting into your omelet, right?
Thank you for using jibs.
Right. So it's those little pieces. That's kind of the way I think of it, is the difference between a calcium added to a ration and oyster shell is when you got that clean break where it snaps clean in half and doesn't have those little pieces floating around. But it also, you can't underestimate all of the other things that the chicken is made to take this material, chitin, other things, and turn it into beaks and feathers and other stuff. And I just love it. It's cheap. It never goes bad. Total no-brainer for me, every chicken.
So Kevin also asked, at what age should they start getting grit? Do they need grit?
If you buy chick grit and throw it out there, at any point, if they're not ready for it, they won't eat it.
Okay.
Right? So you're never going to be too early, but you technically, right at the very beginning, it doesn't have as much value. But they're still incorporating that process, and so if they don't want it, they're not going to pick at it. But if you've got access to it, then you're good. And I don't necessarily, like, I think a case can be made for separate chick grit versus hen grit, just because the hen grit's a little bit bigger. But even in the regular hen grit, there are smaller pieces that chicks could get access to.
Okay.
So to me, you can go either direction.
And we always just recommend separating it. You don't mix it with your feed. You have it in another corner,
Right.
where they can go
It's
get it if they want, but they're not getting it with every
They
meal.
didn't see that. That really is a perfect.
Yeah.
And like Josh said, if they need it, they'll come get it.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see. We have another question. Should grit be given only when given lay pellets, or can it be given with developer feed?
No, it can be given all the time.
Anytime.
All the time.
Yep.
Okay.
All
Thanks
the
for that
time.
question, Greg.
Yeah, and they're eating. Remember, they're out there. Especially if you've got a chicken yard, they're eating yellow jackets, and they're eating box elder
Earwigs.
bugs and earwigs and.
Seeds from wherever.
Right.
Yep.
Yep.
Kevin said jibs are the worst. I would concur, Kevin.
But they're eating dandelion leaves and all
Yeah.
kinds of stuff that is added.
Yeah, if they were in a lab and only eating that feed, you probably wouldn't need a grit. But if they're outside,
Yeah, if they're
it becomes
free-ranging,
pretty important.
which most people do now.
Jolene asked Joss Bio 5.
Okay, so thank you for asking that, Jolene. So all of the feeds that we make, I'll say all, being that they're all in process. It's conceivable you might get one that didn't quite have it, but we've added a probiotic to all of our feeds that we call Bio 5. And this is a product we helped develop for China when China has been very proactive about banning prophylactic antibiotics in the feed industry. And whereas in the U.S., they've basically just taken them away from people in the backyard. Big facilities have a vet on staff, and they can still write a prescription for prophylactic antibiotics, which means you're giving them to chickens all the time, whether they have an infection or not,
okay.
because it actually makes them grow faster, right? But in absence of that, you have situations like we talked about where you can get chickens that start to get sick. And the way that you combat that on a large scale is it's called competitive exclusion. And you fill the digestive system with good feed bacteria, and there's no place for the ones that cause disease to get established. They're just out-competed by the good ones, and they have to be added all the time. So for years, we've had probiotics that we add to the water, and you have to change them every single day, and all the rest of that. But because we developed Bio 5 for the market in China, we had it, and we've added it to all of our feeds. And what Bio 5 does that a lot of people don't know is the competitive exclusion thing is real. Like you will actually prevent a lot of disease problems. But the other pieces of it are when you've got these feed bacteria, what they do is break down undigested protein, and they stay in the digestive system so that when those organisms die, they're the first ones that are absorbed as additional protein, as additional nutrients. So less protein goes out the back of the animal. It doesn't matter if it's a horse or a chicken or whatever. The protein is what the flies come to eat. So if there's not a lot of protein left in the chicken manure or the horse manure, you have less flies. And talk about a benefit that most people who have chickens or goats or whatever, if you could solve flies, this is an all-natural way of solving that, because the feed bacteria make the feed efficiency go up, and there's just less protein for the flies.
Very cool.
That is, yep, very cool.
Okay, so if you have other questions, feel free to ask them. We're going to move on to, I think next we're going to talk about mites and worming.
Oh, nice.
Which is Chris's specialty, because he's
Yeah,
always...
an expert on worms.
Chris loves worms.
Right, that's how I keep this light physique. I think just a little tapeworm goes a long way. Yeah, so we'll do worming first. It's not a huge problem in chickens. I maybe get 1 or 2 customers in a year that actually needs to worm the chickens, so it's not a huge problem. But it is something you'll see in the waste, in the manure, if you're cleaning out the coop. In boxes, you might see them. This is a nice all-natural way to do it. It just changes the pH of the gut, changes the acidity, so the worm is not happy, and the chicken literally just poops them out and they're done. Yep, so that's a
exciting.
great all-natural way. But like I say, it's something you want to watch for, but it's not very common. And probably more common, but still not a huge problem, is mites on your birds. And you'll see it in the scales on their legs. They'll start to separate, and you'll see kind of a goopy substance in between the scales, or you'll see it on the feathers, and they'll kind of start to goop together, and that's usually a mite. And I know our customers worry a lot that they're going to get the mite, but we're too cold of a host. They might jump on you and they're going to jump right back off. I think a chicken's body temperature is 103, if I remember right, and that's where that mite's happy. So if you have your kids out there or something, they're not going to come to you. We're just too cold. But again, there's a ton of all natural ways to take care of that. Chickens love doing dust baths. If you have them out free ranging and you have a nice soft spot of dirt, you'll see them rustle it down and flick it up on their back and ruffle their feathers. That's what they're doing a dust bath. So in that spot where they're doing it, you can put in diatomaceous earth, which is again all natural.
So you just mix it with the dirt in the spot that they've already chosen.
Yeah,
they've
picked their spot. If they're not free range and they're in the coop, you can put it in like a cat litter pan, something like that, and they'll nest down in it and do their own dust bath. But very effective. There's a few different options in the Zamzow stores. There's even some pyrethrins and permethrin products that you can use, but these are all natural and very effective.
And using dusts, so even with the dust like the permethrin, you would still put that in the area they are already kind of doing that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And they'll pick their spot, and once one bird sees the other one, they
just kind of
they
take
all
care of it
share that
themselves.
spot.
Nice.
But yeah, they'll do their own dust bath daily.
Okay. So I think on the list we were going to talk about BTG, but we already talked about that. I do have to ask Jos, though. Jos, what is this?
So this medieval device is a plucker. This is a power plucker, and we have one here at the mill that people can rent. And so if you raise meat birds, it's one thing to go through the process and you're dispatching these birds, you're harvesting, whatever you want to say, but then you got to get the feathers off so that you can as part of the process. And if you haven't ever plucked a chicken, it's a very difficult process, and if you've got 15 to do, it's tough. So the way this thing works is you plug it in, you put the hose in it, and you're dipping the birds real quick. There's a process. We can give you all the details, but you put the birds in here and they tumble around and it pulls the feathers off for you, and you pull them out and you've got a perfectly plucked bird. So we rent this plucker, and it says right on here, this will pluck a chicken in 15 seconds, which would take you a long time. But I wanted to ask Chris right on the spot, how important is the Ziegler Schnell flag?
I don't know how anybody can survive with that one.
Ziegler Schnellwag. I think this must be German for scale.
Very good. All right, so that was about all we had for today. We'll leave it open here for just another second if anybody has any questions. Jolene says the Ziegler Filschwag is it's the Mercedes 3000 of scales, apparently.
Oh, nice.
Very first.
Nice.
Fantastic.
She typed that out that quick?
Yeah.
Did she
Did she
spell it
spell
right?
it properly?
It's not that part. I added that part. So
Oh.
I guess I'm assuming.
Nice. Yeah,
think she spelled
so
Mercedes.
while you're waiting for more questions, you can show as the bird grows, you definitely want to up their feed and their water sizes. I really do like that one just because it has that hook. It is important to hang. Like we said, birds scratch and they make a mess. So to get it up off the ground, it saves you a ton of feed.
Yeah.
But instead of setting it there, they will fill that with their
And
own
you
waste.
just
so
load
quick.
it up on the top there.
Load it up on the top, which I prefer no lid, because otherwise they'll nest on it
Oh,
and poop
right.
all over it, and you just have one more thing to clean. So that's the beauty of an open
Nice.
open lid.
One other thing we wanted to talk about too, Joss. You were mentioning as we were walking through this, just how many different feeds there were, and I was wondering if we could just walk around and kind of look at some of the feeds that are here.
Sure. The thing about
Thanks,
feeds that aren't, without any chemical preservative or anything like that, you have a shelf life for feed, and so we want all these feeds to be manufactured fresh and then fed while they're still at their highest value. And it makes it so that not all of the feeds that we make and have made for a long time belong at every store. So you might go to one Zamzow store and they might have our formula for older horses, and if there's no customer shopping at another store, they may not carry it. But we wanted everybody to be aware that we carry so many different things, from pygmy goat feeds to individual, if you were just looking for bags of whole oats or bags of wheat, the individual ingredients. But we carry right here State Fair rabbit feed, one of the highest quality rabbit pellets that you can buy anywhere, that we make here fresh, and
Guinea
guinea pig diets.
Rabbit, cob with molasses, cob without molasses.
The whole line of pigeon mix over here.
Right. We also, you can get bags of yeast, bags of organic kelp meal. A lot of people with goats are feeding, different. They're kind of building their own blends, and we have a lot of those ingredients are available for people if they were interested.
Flaxseed meal.
I love
Timothy
the vitamin salt mix for llamas and horses. And
Yeah, I mean, some of these, like, I remember years ago when I just started at Zamzow's, we'd have a lot of these things, and I don't see them. We don't have a lot of them in the store anymore.
Right.
But we never stopped making them.
Right. We still do a lot of them. We just don't do a lot of them at all stores.
Right.
So to keep them fresh. So if somebody
Whole bunch of
wanted
horse
one,
feeds.
you can request it, or you could come here and get it. And if you loved it and you wanted it stocked at a particular store, every manager is happy to adjust their what they're carrying just for you.
Yep.
Cool.
So we have dairy feeds and steer feeds, and like we say, we have our goat vitamin mineral salt mix was built specifically for goats in this valley. We work together with some of the real proactive goat farms and help them solve some nutritional issues that we have just here, and that's the best goat mineral that you can buy for this area.
Yeah. Yes, Kevin, the layer and developer are 50-pound bags. I don't think we have smaller bags.
No, we do.
No.
We do 50s.
In the chick start, we do a 25,
Yeah.
but again, as much as they go through.
And
Yeah.
the scratch.
Okay.
Scratch we also do.
Cool. All right. So I think that's about it. So we'll leave it open just for another few minutes here. If you have any other questions, go ahead and throw them out. I want to thank you guys everybody for tuning in and watching. It was a fun video.
This was a fun one.
I
Super
like
fun
doing
for
the
us,
the
yeah.
mill tour.
Yeah.
It's a neat thing. It's a neat place to see, and then just to realize how long it's been here.
Right,
And
right.
it's really, I mean, it's probably one of the oldest buildings here in Meridian.
Yeah, it is. And I we didn't talk. The one thing we didn't talk about is cracked corn being thermogenic.
Oh, do you want to go over that?
We didn't talk about that one. So people say, well, it's cold, and I was going to feed 20% to help them, but that's going to shorten their life. What do I feed? And the answer is corn. So corn in a bird is what they call a thermogenic feed. It actually creates heat in the body of the bird. And so if it's super cold outside, you give them extra cracked corn as a way of helping them deal with the cold, not extra protein, which is the dirty fuel that doesn't necessarily help and shortens their life. So to the same token, if it's 110, you don't want to be feeding a lot of cracked corn because the birds are already dealing with it being too hot, and they don't need any extra cracked corn when it's hot.
Yeah. Cory, one quick question. So that pelletizer, or the extruder, would you classify that as a semi-permeable membrane?
Technically I would. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay,
we got it in there. I was getting worried.
As soon as you said, I knew that was coming. These bags you can also call a semi-permeable membrane. Yeah,
that's a good point.
All right. That's okay. We got
Thanks
the
a
joke
lot.
in. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you again soon. Have a good one.